Your boy making cold cuts, and I ain't talking about the sandwiches.
Could my career give me joy? Is that okay?
In order to find joy in your career, the sub ask, the unspoken question is do I know how to find joy? Do I know how to seek it?
Mm. Let's not undermine how difficult a question that is.
This kind of courage when it comes to the audacity to improve
When is it appropriate to put yourself first?
and like the audaciousness of wanting better and that thin line between improvement and greed.
Will you trade safety, security, hustle, everything you've done to get to this point? Will you trade it for a chance at joy?
Only thing that protects you from arrogance is humility. But humility can quickly become an anchor that drags you into meekness.
I'm always willing to take the risk, but that comes with a lot of weight. And it's bitten me in the ass a few times,
And the real
right?
conversation we're having is what allows you to keep being you. Because when you
Mm.
stop being you, that's when the problems really start arising. And that's where we really start getting deep in this conversation.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so official.
I know it's crazy. But all right. So this is the first. Well, it's not the first episode. This is the third episode, but it's the first actual like I'm recording this for the podcast that is already in motion. So it's the first episode of like every if you did watch the first two, this is what it's really going to be like moving forward in my mind. And so I want to start with a short intro. This is, as you can see, name here. I'm not going to butcher your last name because I'll just call you Jake or other pseudonyms. But um, at this point, I would venture to say, correct me if I'm wrong, like pretty good friends. Known
Yeah,
this guy,
yeah,
I guess, for years now, but really just through Call of Duty as a main format. But
yeah.
I've met this man in person, been to his house, met his family a couple of times. I think we've definitely built a unique relationship up to this point. And so when I thought about making this idea a reality, you were one of the first people who popped into my mind of like having an ability and a willingness to engage in deep conversation, especially once we try to cross that threshold into like a very public format.
Yeah,
For the
totally.
7 people who might actually watch it, it might,
Yep.
it's a risk. It might turn into millions later on at a later date. And so I appreciate you coming
Yeah, man,
on
of
and taking
course.
this ride with me. And if you want to throw in any intro outside of that, I'll pass you the
Yeah,
mic and then we'll get into
sure.
it.
My name's Jake Skirvin is my last name. And yeah, it's cool. Like, me and I, like, developing a friendship primarily on video games is kind of unique. It's my first friendship, really, that's been like that. Uh, we met during COVID, like in 2020, where we're all just locked down. We both lived in LA at the same time, but everything
Yeah.
shut down. So, yeah. So, and then, yeah, I think me and Ike just, we have similar interests. These kind of conversations both fulfill us and we get excited about them. And, we randomly will start having these kind of conversations during the game, which isn't a prime time to do that. Um, but whenever we have gotten together, I mean, I think last time we sat in a parking lot and talked for like 3 hours. So it's just what we enjoy. We value each other. And I'm happy to be on it.
Appreciate it. Great
Yeah.
intro. And with that, let's get
That's the
deep.
hard part.
Man, I got into it. Now you just forget all about the cameras and
That's right.
get right back to what we usually do. So I think a great place to start, in my opinion, is just picking up really from the last conversation we were having. Again, we were trying to have it on Call of Duty, and I don't think that was the place to have it. But you had said something along the, this is before we're getting into all the work stuff, but it was just about kind of the principle that I think really I'm trying to dig out in my own life of like when you talk about things that determine not the trajectory, but the direction of your life in terms of how you make your decisions. I feel like life is really a culmination of difficult decisions. And sometimes the difficulty is not necessarily impact related, but just complexity of like even simple decisions through the idea or principle of compound interest turn into big decisions down the road. And I think that's one of the things I really wanted this podcast to try to highlight of like I spend so much time thinking about life in this way. I think it would be, well, I hope it's helpful to people watching this to take that walk with me through this train of thought. And so you were talking about the concept of when you reach this place in your career where you have to now decide what is driving you. And I think you're in a really unique position to where it's like, even when things are all good, it doesn't make the decision any easier. It's like I was in this program growing up called Self-Enhancement Inc. And one of their little mantras was life has options. And I think it's really, you know, that sounds great on paper. And I'm glad it was drilled into me at an early age, but it's something that has really helped me understand the crux of that, of like making decisions is always tough, especially if you're somebody who's a forward thinker and you want to put yourself in a better position. Better is so subjective. It's really hard to define, especially if you're not self-assessing while you're doing it. And so it's that question that I just built 3 levels on.
Yeah. It's well, there's a lot just to give, the listener context. I'm a graphic designer by trade. I didn't go to a 4-year school, and I've, kind of did some high school programs, and honestly, just been a hustler, like just been hustling, working my way up. Didn't have money to go to a school, so I've just been grinding. And thankfully, I've been successful. I'm at a high level now. I've been, working at, some top ad agencies. I've worked at top tech companies. And I think the whole time I've just been focused on grinding, just scraping by, like whatever next opportunity presents itself, I'm jumping in, I'm doing it without without the goal in mind, without like, oh, what do I actually want to do? I never really had that mindset. I just had like, hey, opportunity presents itself, take it. So now I'm 13 years in. I'm successful. I've grinded. I work hard, and I've reached a senior level of where I'm at, and I feel conflicted. Where I feel half of me goes, "Good, hey man, you can support a family. You can, you have a house. Like you've reached success objectively." And then the other half of me goes like, well, I wonder if I was to ask myself 13 years ago, like, what would be your dream job? What would that be? What would that look like? And if I was to have had the opportunity to live life like that, you always play the what if games. Like, I wonder how I could have done this. I could have done that. So what happened with Ike, what I was telling him is that, so now where I'm at now, I have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. I have a wife, she's a stay-at-home mom. I'm fully remote, so I'm a new dad. I'm in this new position where I'm providing for 4 people plus a dog, and and I just so happened to kind of stumble upon a dream job where I'm really into tattoos. I think you can see up on the walls I have tattoo work.
Couldn't tell from the
I have,
arm.
yeah, my arms. Yeah, I'm fully into tattoos. It's like kind of the subculture that I'm within as well. A lot of my best friends are tattoo artists, and so I kept seeing this tattoo related company that's like trying to. They're trying to be the play like a social media for tattoo artists where they can book, they can you can find the best tattoo artists in your city, blah blah blah. And I'm like, yo, that would be if I could do design work for them, if I could do documentaries for them, if I could do art direction for them, that would be absolutely dreamy. So on a whim, I just go to their website and I just send my information. They hit me back in 10 minutes. And I'm sitting here going, no way. Like what like this is this is like an absolute dream. And just for the audience knows, I'm interviewing with them tomorrow. So it's one of those things where I'm talking to Ike about it and I'm like, yo, this is this is I'm so conflicted because for the longest time, 13 years of hustle, and then now I'm in dad mode where it's like really what dad mode is just it's just security. Security is the focus. Like neutral, like I have a great work-life balance, I get paid well, all that stuff. But then this opportunity pops up and I go, is now the time to jump into the dream thing? And that's what we were talking about. And I'm very conflicted. I half of me goes, no, dude, chill out, appreciate what you got, da 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 da. And I'm like, valid, great, perfect, do that. Other half of me, and like, I'll talk to some buddies about it who are like, no, dude, this job is made for you. This is what would fulfill your soul. And I'm like, yeah, like I get that too. So I don't know if that answered any question, but at least gave some context.
Yeah. This is, I was actually going to say, let me jump in here because I'm like, I was feeling like you're doing what I should have been doing in terms of
No, you're good.
the conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it's a great segue because it helps you, you know, align your thoughts in it because I'm asking a really big and hard question. But even
Yeah.
outside of that, I think you contextualize it perfectly for me to then funnel even deeper into what we're really talking about and how deep it really gets very quickly in terms of even not knowing you and your history and your background, like all the things that make you you. It's like just hearing the context of that dilemma opens up a lot of questions for or even if people aren't asking them, the kind of questions I feel like people should be asking. And where like I would love for our minds to go as a society when we hear stuff like that. The big questions of like,
there you go.
What is guiding us? What should be the questions you're asking yourself in that scenario of like, yes, you have a family to provide for them, or you have job security. You have everything you want on paper, everything you feel like you're supposed to have.
Yeah.
Again, it's like, and I'm like, I don't hide my beliefs and my faith by any minute, but I'm also not out here pushing it on people and making that my whole identity. But when you get in situations like this, where you're like, something's happening here, like this is crazy. Like when you start to track things like that, and you're aware enough to see these things unfold before you, and not just in retrospect or after the fact, where it leads people to things like regret and like what if, and that cycle. It's like you have a really, and this is what I meant earlier of like, you have a great opportunity here, even to engage yourself in this way of like, wow, I never even thought of this as a reality.
So I want to jump in just for a second, just to give even more context. I think just to give the listener some background on me, why I say it was 13 years of hustling is because I come from, not a lot of money. I would say definitely we're working class people. I'm definitely, we were just opportunity. Like we're trying to, like opportunity presents itself, you jump on it.
Survival.
And yeah. And so I kept doing that for 13 years. Then I landed in a spot where I'm in a suburban house in a cul-de-sac with 2 kids and a wife. And I'm sitting here like, I not, I love my family, but I never set out the goal of any of it, which sounds like a really strange thing where it's just like, it just made sense. Like, yeah, of course, marry the love of your life. Of course, have kids with her. Of course, buy the house. Of course, get the dog, get the picket fence. Like, but it was never a set in stone thing. And so that's why I say it's a dilemma where I am grateful. I understand. I have perspective on what I have. I have plenty of friends who also give me that perspective and say, "Hey, be grateful, motherfucker." Yeah. But at the same time, 13 years of grinding without a goal weighs on. And then now I can think the question is it my turn to really be selfish in a way and have a goal and just go like, I want to do X, So yeah, that's gives them more perspective.
And
More
even
context.
furthermore than that, of like the risk in looking at that as a goal and opportunity of like the unknown. And that's where I feel
Yes.
like a lot of people get trapped in not even considering or engaging. That's where a lot of the fear is activated in terms of like, because again, part of the conversation we had before is like, yes, this looks like the dream, but in the whole point that you're making of like, I never had a goal. So the dream is all feeling. You've never actualized or articulated it. It's never become concrete. If we were to assume that this were in fact the dream and you just didn't realize it and we're capitalizing on it now, you're in the process of making it tangible.
Sure. I wish it was the dream. I wish it was my dream. I wish it was. I wish it, because then I would be here and I'm like, cool, I made it. But it wasn't. It was sink or swim. it was figure it out. It was, and hey, I made it. But here we are with this dilemma.
Have you ever heard of Maslow's laws of his hierarchy of needs?
Sounds a little familiar, but I'm
it's
not
this
familiar.
Very interesting topic, and we might have discussed it in the past. I might have referenced it. It's something I bring up a lot because it really changed how I look at things when I first learned about it in school. The simple idea is it's a pyramid, kind of like the food pyramid, where it's like
you have brought this up. Yes,
3 levels of like first basic needs: food, water, shelter, which hard to achieve. That last level, right? A lot of people don't have.
Yep.
Then the second level just becomes like health, wellness, happiness, joy, things of that nature. Like once you are surviving, that is what comes next. And you can the whole thing about this hierarchy is you cannot get past the level until you meet it, until you achieve each standard. And the third level in the top of the pyramid is this stuff that we're trying to talk about on this podcast and dive into, of like all the hard hitting questions, the philosophy of like, oh, why are we here? What are we? All that stuff. But even lesser than that, of like, what is a dream?
There you go. Sure.
Why does it make me feel this way? And like, how do I? The thing that's crazy to me is there's a lot of us out here who, and I'm like, and this I think is what really led me to making this concrete and like pushing this grind at this point, despite my whole, own internal compass of like the idea that you could do all the work to reflect and be self-reflective and assess and can make that a priority in your life and still be oblivious to things that are apparently obvious to other people around you because of
Mm,
you, how much is always going on inside of us internally.
mm,
And that's why I love that hierarchy is because it really very simply illustrates how all of these things are all happening at once every single day at every single moment of your life of like if you're not looking at it at in that way, how are you organizing these things? Like every day you are into even though you have a house, even though you have a family, you're not worried about what you're going to eat. You know you got food at home, and if you
yeah,
didn't have
right.
food, you know you got money to go to the store, and yet every
Yeah, right.
day you got to figure that shit out. It's like what are you going to eat? What are you going to do?
Yeah,
Do you see what I'm saying?
100%. What that reminds me of is, and I bring this up with my wife a lot. Um, about midway through my career, I had a break where we weren't making great money, but we weren't minimum wage anymore. And we were both in the same, we were both making the same amount. We were both more well off than either of our parents, for example, this, perspective. Um, we had a very modest, small old house, no kids yet, a dog. And both of us went to work every day, came back every day. We always talk about how peaceful that mode of life was. And I think when you were talking about the pyramid, it was that sweet spot where we knew that our needs were being met, but we definitely were on a budget, and we definitely didn't have the luxury of having like, oh yeah, just swipe the credit card, just whatever, just like we could buy whatever. No, 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 no. Like we were very much on a budget, but we found so much peace within those. I think a 2 to 3 year period. That's actually when we met our mutual friend Tim. That's kind of the moment of our life that we found the most peace. And from there, thankfully, I've been able to make even more money. But what they say, more money, more problems. So, but it just allows your brain to start, instead of just surviving, you start thinking bigger, and you have the privilege of thinking even bigger and bigger about your actual dreams and why we're doing this, why are we doing these things. So,
And I love the term the privilege of thinking because
yeah,
that was another thing when I was in school, much like the hierarchy of needs. It's like I really got fascinated in the study of not just psychology, but philosophy and
sure.
how much overlap there is of like completely separate schools of thought that seem to be asking very different questions, but so much overlap in terms of examples and scenarios that they're pulling from. And so when you say
Mm,
the privilege of thought, one of the things that popped into my head is like they talk about like Socrates and Plato and these famous philosophers. And the funny thing to me that always sticks out to me is like they talk about these guys in such a great light now. But in reality, when you study this stuff, it's like they really just sat around all day not doing anything
yep,
and like
yep,
just truly like putting all their time and energy into thinking.
yeah,
And they only could do that because they had such status in the Roman society of like
yes,
being so rich,
yeah,
but being so unfulfilled by the
mm.
wealth and the things that everybody else is doing that you literally just sit and think.
yes,
And it's crazy how even in that regard, we've shifted away as a society of like looking at that as a privilege. I feel like
yeah.
it's hard to even articulate what a struggle it is for everybody. Even I'm like, as I sit here and be like, oh, let's get deep and do this podcast for no money and no, I'm like, I told somebody earlier today how disappointing it is to me when I see in myself what a struggle it is for me to just not do things when I feel like
Mm,
it's to do. And it worries
mm,
me. in a very deep way, but I'm like, I'm still fighting this battle.
Mm.
And it's still like knowing that that's a privilege to sit and think and prioritize. I've made a history of prioritizing that, and still, 30 years in, I'm struggling,
Mm.
which I'm saying that like there's gonna be a bunch of people people watching this who's older will be like 30 years, huh? And you said 13. It's like that sounds like for somebody who's lived a lot of life, we
Of course.
know how minuscule it is, but at the same
Sure.
time,
It's
it
still
feels
real.
like a lot. It feels like more than it is.
Yeah.
It's more substantial.
Yeah. Well, what that reminds me of is, and it's kind of what I was talking to you about on the phone that day regarding the situation. The debate I have going on in my head is my current job. I get off on time. I make good money. It's very calm, but I was telling you, I kind of measure my worth now as a new dad is how as I show up for my kids in the 2.5 hours that I have to hang out with them before they need to go to sleep. What kind of dad am I showing up as? And that's how I kind of measure my worth, which isn't fair, but that's a whole different topic. Why is it that I have this chill job and I still leave that chill job drained at the end of it? Part of the reason is I'm doing unfulfilling work, work that doesn't speak to me, that I'm not passionate about. And I'm doing that every day for 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day. And I'm stuck doing that. So the debate is, okay, well, here's the opposite. You have a job that could completely fulfill you, that you don't have much work-life balance. Are you still going to be that drained dad in that 2.5 hours? Or is it possible that you doing fulfilling work, you working hard during your work hours, actually gives you life? It actually makes you excited and actually gives you energy. And up until this point in my career, I don't know. I've flirted with identifying with my job. I've worked for some big companies, but nothing that speaks to me like this tattoo job does, where I'm like, oh, literally anyone who knows me and they would hear about this job, they'd be like, nailed it. Like you couldn't find a better, Um, and so, yeah, it kind of reminds me of what you're saying with the Greek philosophers a little bit, where misery comes from comfort sometimes. And I'm curious about if that's my situation right now.
Well, I think even if we take it even further, I feel like the more we talk about it, the more apparent it becomes that it is in the way that the grass is always greener.
Right.
And it's like and again, I'm like, I think that's another thing that makes us kindred spirits is like, the funny thing is like, we were both living in LA and not knowing it, but we're both also from Oregon. And
Sure,
like
right.
coming up like when you grow up in a certain way where you don't have comfort, you haven't experienced, you never had wealth or security, like privilege in the
Oh,
way
yeah.
that you don't have to think about if you're going to be okay or not. Like there's some people who never had that thought. Like it's not a thing they consider.
Yes.
That's a completely different life perspective, not just a lens or a mental perspective, but it's like that is a completely different way of living. So that when you transition, it's almost like the Hunger Games, where it's like you just went 5 districts in one day. And
Yeah.
it's a culture shock.
That reminds me of what I was saying about when my wife and I were in our modest, small little house in sketchy part of Portland. Uh, but it was what was comforting, is what we know, is what we grew up in. And so now that we're the safe suburban upper middle class family, it's weird. It's just like everyone else is pretty happy around us, like from our perspective, but we're just like this is kind of strange, you know.
And I think that begs the question of, well, even before I go into that part of it, I think the thing I wanted to hit on most of like just when you talk about if this is that, without getting into the specifics of like that's the biggest thing for me when you were describing it to me, how I knew this was a bigger conversation than what we were having. It's like it's not any of the things like I'm sure people are watching it like they're asking questions that we've already discussed of like it's not the money. It's not that they're offering you less. There's really no downside except for the risk. They're offering you the same amount of money. Like, yes, we talked about, it's a startup culture, but again, when you talk to them tomorrow, you're not like if they say the wrong things, that makes your decision easier. What makes it
Totally.
harder is if they don't say them.
Yes, yes, I think that's what we're talking about too. And just to give the listeners even more context, if you were to put the jobs next to each other and bullet point out the dream jobs, as of what I know right now, is better in all aspects. It's better pay, better benefits, better everything you would want. It's better. It's still fully remote, which is a non-negotiable for me. And so exactly what Ike is saying is, of course, if I get on the thing and I sniff out some toxic behavior or whatever, it's going to be easy choice. Stick with what you know, relax, and enjoy it. You know, what's going to be very difficult is if I fall in love with it. And I'll be honest, I'm falling in love with this job. And if I fall in love more after talking to the CEO, oh man, it's going to be, it's going to be, a kind of a simple way of looking at it is I take my 7 out of 10 job that I currently have for the unknown, but the possibility of it being a 10 out of 10. And some
Having
people will be like, nah,
to reach for that.
yes. And that's the thing. And thankfully, I would classify myself as that is one of my strengths is being a risk taker. I think even since I've known Ike, I've had 4 different jobs or 5 different jobs since I've known him. I'm always willing to take the risk, but that comes with a lot of weight, and it's bitten me in the ass a few times. So it's I think that's the everyone's question right now. Is like, is it the time? It's not just me anymore. It's my kids. It's everyone. Everyone will feel the impact.
And so that leads to another interesting question. But first, I don't want to forget this other point of where when we talk about the right fit and like the audaciousness of wanting better and that thin line between improvement and greed. And like those seem like very different concepts, but I'm like, so it's as thin as this line separating the video between us of like you don't know when you're in a space of transition. It is often not slow and easy, and that's what you were describing earlier of like a comfortable, slow rise and transition into the position that you're in now is what has allowed you to grow comfortably. But when it's quick, like life comes at you fast. And that's what to at least to the risk takers that I've been able to build relationships and have these kind of conversations with, that's what gives them the prowess to feel like they can claim that title is to have built a track record of quickly assessing risk and overcoming the fear associated with it of any to get better, you have to be willing to let go. You cannot receive and give at the same time. And so it's a very like it's a fluid dance where you gotta, it's a little you gotta be smooth with the okay, I'm gonna let go and try to get this.
Yes.
And be okay with if I don't get it, I'll get so I'll figure it out.
Yeah, well, I think you bring up a really interesting point, and something that I've thought quite a bit about that I don't think is talked about enough. Um, I think what's pushed to us, especially on social media, especially part of this like hustle culture, get yours, all this stuff, is this fake it till you make it situation. And there is value in that. There is, um, I would guess that the general public, in in a general sense, has a problem getting out of their comfort zones. We have a lot of mutual friends who are in their comfort zones, and we just want to shake them loose because we see so much potential in them. Um, on If you flip that coin over, and I'm not to toot my horn too much, but I have that skill. I have that muscle strengthened where I have been a risk taker. I've been taking the risks. And what's not talked about enough is, sure, you faked it, you made it, and then what? People don't talk about the weight of, oh my God, I faked it through that interview. And now I'm sitting here and I have this expectation that's on my lap. Well, all I was told was to fake it till you made it. And no one mentioned anything about the next steps after this. And, as someone who didn't go to a 4-year school, I always feel like I have this thing on me where it's simply put, it's imposter syndrome, where I don't feel like I should be there. I don't feel like I'm qualified enough. But I've had Ike look at my portfolio. I've interviewed, with Ike, just prep for interviews. He knows I'm talented. He knows I got what's at stake objectively. But still, I don't think what's talked about enough is that weight of just going, all right, fake it till you make it. Easier said than done. And then you're sitting there. How do you feel now?
And I think that's a huge layer. That's a whole nother layer of this conversation about dynamics and like again, we talk about thin lines, humility and arrogance versus
Yes.
confidence. Of
Yes.
You the only thing that protects you from arrogance is humility. But humility can quickly become an anchor that drags you into meekness and into that fear and a lack of confidence. It is a very hard window to hit. It's like kicking a field goal in Madden. If you got that little green box, it seems like it's easy to hit with practice. If you're used to doing it, it is easy to hit. But if you're not used to doing it, it's easy to miss.
Yep.
It's an easy window to miss. But I want to go back to, there was a question wrote down, because I think that's another huge thing that we don't talk about either. And I think you have a very unique perspective in the sense of, just for context of viewers, like I've often complimented and asked you about, how you get the kind of family dynamic I feel like you've established, of like, obviously lots of hard work, many years. Like, you met your wife very early, known her longer than you have. All of that helps, but it's still a marriage, and it's like, it's a lot of work.
Sure. Yeah.
When you talk about having to make decisions like this, how much is the family as a whole involved in that decision? Because at the end of the day, it's a you thing, but it's a we thing at the same time. And that's such a hard balance. I feel like nobody openly discusses.
Yeah. I love that question. When you say, but first, just give context to the listener. I've been with my wife since I was 15 years old. I'm 32 now. And so, like I said, I've been with my wife longer than in, I've had more time in my life with my wife than without her. And so, we got married at 20 and we just had our, we have 2 kids now, but they're 2 and 3. So last 3 years, we got 2 kids. So when you sit, when you say it is an individual decision, the first thing that came out to me is like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is anymore. Like as corny as it sounds, is like when they say like, when 2 people get married, they become one. Oh man, I feel that. And then when you have kids, you become 4. And so I feel like I am the backbone or the base or the foundation or the drummer in the band, whatever you want to, whatever analogy you want to put or metaphor of my family. And I live in that. The only time I really don't live in that is through Call of Duty, where I just play this alter ego. But I think that's kind of what we're talking about is if, let's just imagine if I didn't have a family, I would take that tattoo job in half a second. It wouldn't even be a consideration. I can handle the turmoil. I can handle the stress. I can do all of that. What's not fair is burdening first my wife with that. Now I'm more irritable. Now I'm not sleeping good enough. Now I'm stressed for this meeting. And now, especially from working from home, and she's a stay-at-home mom, we're interacting all day, every day. That's not fair. Then, from my kid's perspective, now dad, again, a little more irritable, doesn't want to play as much afterwards. It has shorter temper. All of these things where that's not fair for them either. All because dad wanted a selfish pursuit, which is valid and great and awesome. And so I think that's what we're really talking about is when is it okay? When is it appropriate to put yourself first? And I will always default to my family comes first. That's just the kind of person I am. But then the question is, okay, let's say you let that tattoo thing go. You let that dream job slide. When is it okay for you to be selfish? And that's a very valid question. Because when it comes to my kids' perspective, I go, well, they definitely need me right now as much to 100% as I can be. But when will that ever stop? I can't think of an age. Even if I go 10 years old, definitely need dad 100%. 16-year-old, okay, that needs dad 200%. 20-year-olds needs dad 100%. I'm going to be there forever. That's my whole goal in life is to be 100% there for them. Which makes this, when I think of, and I say that out loud, I don't even know why I'm interviewing tomorrow. It's so simple. It makes everything so, which is the gift of what kids give you. What kids give you, they just narrow out that your priority list. They go kids first, wife second, friends third, whatever, family, whatever you want to put. But I don't know if they answered any of that.
I think I can restate the question after I say this because I think this is a great place I want to jump in where even, again, context for the viewer of a lot of what you're saying is great and will resonate with people who are parents. But I think it's also important to highlight, even for our conversation that we're having, like there's some people who it's like, that's just the right thing to do. And like morally, they will let that drive them. But I think it's, again, part of what makes your situation unique to me. And, this may not be the best way to articulate it. But again, as somebody who I'm like being I hate the term people person, but just like a feeler, being able to intuit people's feelings. It's like, it's a step beyond that with you. in my
Okay.
opinion, of like not everybody truly has the motivation internally to be
Mm,
there for their family. Of like you really want to be around your kids in the sense
yeah.
that everybody loves their kids. I'm not saying people don't love their kids, but I'm
No, of course not.
you know what I'm saying? Like it hits
Yeah.
harder for you of like that is your priority more than like
Yes.
that brings you more fulfillment than having the dream job does. Showing up and
Uh,
feeling like you did a good job as a dad, as a husband is going to do
yes.
more for you than a dream job will. And so I think it's important to highlight that part of it when you talk about considering this job so that you could really understand the conundrum of like
Yes.
that's this job is to that degree where it's like it is a conversation though because you also have I'm like again I don't know Courtney very well but I'm like she's supportive she's
Oh,
not just gonna support you on some like she's not a I'm like Courtney's
no.
not a pushover she's
No.
not gonna just be like you do what you want Jake and I'll make it work like that's
No. No.
you see
She's a
what I'm
ride or
saying
die. Oh yeah.
she knows what you need and what you do. She can tell you sometimes better than you can see it yourself.
100%.
And
Yes.
so that's where that initial question comes in of like when you're having these kinds of conversations,
Mm,
you would probably just default to, I'm not even going to consider it
mm,
because of all these things if you got in this mindset. And I think that's what I love so much about your family is it's like it's a rare I mean, it's not as rare as people would like it to seem,
sure.
media or like whatever you want to call it. I don't want to, turn it
Right.
into a, but
No.
I'm like, it's a abnormal situation to find yourself in to find this kind of support from your
Yeah.
family.
Yeah. It's very interesting you say that because if I'm looking at it from Courtney's lens, and I think you've really articulated that well of our dynamic, where she is, the whole she's my better half or other half or whatever. She's the other side of me that also she wants me to succeed. She she's in the same boat, and we're talking about the same things. But then the lens is she's mom, and she's a stay at home mom, and she's 100% 24 mom, and she has that perspective too. And so thankfully, I have this network of people, and you're in that network where we all just want, including myself, just the best for me. And we all, we're all just trying to think of like, let's look at this, man. Like these are very important, tough, meaningful decisions that you keep putting yourself in, which is exhausting if you're married to me, because every 2.5 years I'm switching it up, doing something else. Um, yeah, it's, I feel when you say it like that, I feel very grateful for my network. you know,
And
yeah,
that's why I think we have to emphasize that before we can move into the next stage of this same question of like when you try to if we were going to dig a little deeper of like that's why it's a conversation because again it's like these people who know you it's not a like it's not selfishness it's a
mm-mm,
you understanding to be the best version of yourself, this is what it requires. And that's a long list
mm,
of things that we boiled down to have this conversation of like, again, I'm like, it doesn't even help to give the audience the context. They kind of just have to trust of what we're talking about. Like, they don't know me, but it's like, you know me. And I'm like, I'm never going to sugarcoat it. I'm like, I'm going to call you out. I'm like, and I'm going to
100%.
do it without judgment of like, if you kind of being a
Yeah,
dickhead or
yeah,
you're being
yeah, of
selfish, like,
course.
that's what
Right.
it is. And sometimes there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. But this is what I think, at least from outside of, building a relationship and a friendship, it's like just as an individual who has found aspects of another person that I respect. I'm like,
Yeah.
one of the things that I respect about you is the way your internal thought process approaches things in terms of like not just it's not as simple as morality. It's like you're considerate by definition. It's like you are considering a lot of others before yourself. And we can unpack why all that is, but at the end of the day, that's what it is. And I've met there's a lot of ways to be considerate and there's a lot of reasons for doing so.
Sure.
It's not always internally motivated from a place of morality. It's not always a priority for people. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like, 100%. Even if people weren't considering you are still you can't change. There's certain things about our nature that we can't change. We can only run from or ignore or suppress. And that's what I mean in terms of like the thing that I always have a deep respect for people who care about other people, whether they feel good about it or not.
Well, I think that just a second, like, thank you. Appreciate you. Love you. I think what we're really talking about is what happens when the selfless person, when the person who that puts other people before themselves constantly and consistently forever. Yeah, it's respectable. It's commendable. It's like, damn, that he's doing it. That's awesome. What we're not talking about is the weight of what that feels like as the person who's being selfless. And I think that's what I'm struggling with. To put it in a completely different context, I'm not this Gandhi type. I do have selfish things that I do. And one of the selfish things that I do is I ride a Harley. It's, to hear that a dad is even on a motorcycle is insane. I get it. But it's something for me. It's something that I'm doing. Similar to tattoos. It's only for me. I'm not doing it for anyone. I'm already married. I'm washed up. But when I do get to ride my bike and when I do get to have a tattoo, the amount of joy it brings, because it's such a small portion of my life that is just fully selfish, only for my self-interest, only for my joy. It strikes me of how infrequent that is. And I say that, but I'm covered with tattoos. But you get my point. Majority of my life is not lived like that. And so I'm wondering, could my career give me joy? Is that okay? Like, could that happen? I understand, like, again, all the context. I get that it's a privilege to even be able to be in a position where it could give you joy. But will you trade safety, security, hustle, everything you've done to get to this point? Will you trade it for a chance at joy? And that's a good question.
That's a bar. That's a bar. If I wasn't recording this, I would write that shit down and put it in a book.
It's a good question.
I'm like, bro, that's not even a question. It's a question, but it's posed to society. It is the human. We talk about the human experience a lot. And I'm like, shit, modern day philosophers. We're philosophers also right now, because that is a big question for society, for the human race, of like, that's the kind of question that crosses cultures, of like, whether you're Japan or Russia, like that is the question that everybody hopes to be able to ask themselves. When we talk about this kind of courage, when it comes to the audacity to improve, really, when you talk about depth and like how much is packed into that, that in itself has a lot of people in bondage. It keeps you from joy. Just the thought of like, some people, they don't even know how to pursue it. But even once you get past that point of like, I want to be happy, That's because
Mm.
I'm like, let us not downplay the work that it takes to realize if that's really the case for you. Because there's a lot of people who don't realize they don't want to be happy. And it causes its
Mm.
own weight and turmoil in life because they
Yes.
haven't unpacked a lot of, trauma, whatever you want to call it, like psychology
Mm.
side. My point is when you get to that place where you understand I need to prioritize my happiness so that I can be
Yes.
a person. How do I do
Yes.
that you got to understand you had to climb two mountains just to get to that point to start climbing this one. And that's why I love
Ah,
that question because it's not even the end of the journey. It's just like it's the next step.
prior to this conversation, if you were to ask me what I would do, what's the ultimate result after this interview tomorrow? What would I do? I'd be like, you're definitely not taking it. Like, I'd bet all my money that I wouldn't be taking it. Even though I'm still, I'm so sure about that because I just know who I am. I know my, I know my default. Then where we're at now with this conversation, not so sure because what I kind of realized when you were talking is if you're to look at my 24 hours a day, and what percentage of that day is for a selfish pursuit, uh, it's honestly, it's probably the 2 hours or 3 hours we play Call of Duty a night. It's the one time I get to just do something for me. Which is weird because even that it's a team game where we're trying to do this thing. It's an
We're
incredibly
paying
difficult
people to
game.
get online.
Yeah, yeah. Which is still like we're still playing a role within that and serving everyone in that. So I think that's kind of the weight I've finally kind of realized is that it's to not even to be said. Being married is a selfless pursuit. You're giving to that, you're trying to build that, we'll pause there. And then with kids, I mean, kids will drain every ounce of your being, especially little ones. And then on top of that, I spent 8 hours serving this job that I'm not passionate about. And so of course I'm sitting here after 8 hours of work, 2.5 hours of dad, 3 hours of husband, just sitting here like, oh my god, I'm depleted. And of course, I'm going to go on my Harley on the weekend. Of course, I'm going to like try to grasp at any selfishness as I can because I am just all my resources are being used up, and it's giving me perspective on how I'm.
Allocating those resources.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And that's what I think is where we end up in this conversation a lot because it's turned into an ongoing conversation between the two of us where we sit on these, seemingly opposite sections or fences. And
Mm.
we're sitting here, engaging in how much we have in common, despite
Mm.
those glaring differences that seem so opposite of like
Yeah, right.
you're
I love
talking
that.
about being a person who is looking to give to a fault. And that sounds
Mm.
so noble and really pretentious when I say it like this for people who don't know us. But I feel like it's a sliding scale that a lot of people are living on and we just don't realize it. I think that's
Mm.
where a lot of those sayings where it's like, everybody is good. It's like it feels good to do good things for other people and to see that genuine, like to receive that genuine impact that you just had on another human being is a unarticulated, like you cannot articulate the truth of that. They're still trying to
Mm.
figure out why that is a thing and how we can described it. But my point in saying this and the whole fence analogy is this is where it comes back to that because it's something I can relate to of like not taking that pursuit and trying my heart, like making sure I didn't have kids, keeping from getting in relationships because I knew what I was trying to do. I'm like, it's not going to be like you use the word fair a lot in what you were saying. And I think it's important to unpack it in this regard of like even as a person who has not taken those but understands the value and the commitment you're giving. That's
Mhm.
why we keep ending up in this conversation because these are very important for society and like as human beings. And that's where again another portion of that respect comes of like being able to with not withstand, I don't want to say withstand, but to continually meet those expectations is a really interesting thing and it's an important thing. But I think this is where I want to bring the next leg of the conversation of like me standing on
Sure.
the other side of the fence and seeing it. This is why we keep coming back to this conversation of like what I would love to communicate for you as a friend watching you do this is like, I think you have to always remember they all love the real authentic you, which
Mm,
obviously comes in different ways. And it's like you show up a lot of different ways, but you're always you. And the real
right.
conversation we're having is what allows you to keep being you. Because when you
Mm.
stop being you, that's when the problems really start arising. And that's where we really start getting deep in this conversation.
Oh, I think you're hitting it exactly on. And I think that if you just articulated it way better than I did as far as allegation. I was trying to put in the allegation realm. What you just said is perfect. I show up as dad. I show up as husband. I show up as worker. I show up as Call of Duty guy. How often am I showing up as me? And I feel like that's very infrequent. It's very it's so infrequent that I've had almost like an identity crisis of like, what who am I? Like I know what I am to each person, but who am I? Like what am I even into anymore? Like I'm living for so many other people and so many things and pursuits that I feel like I've lost myself in the hustle, in the progress too, in the I pride myself on like my wife and I will never get divorced. Like, we're making that thing work. My kids will always have a dad. Like it's a non-negotiables for me. But because I pour so much into that, I'm left with this I don't even know if I have a cup is probably the best way of putting it. I don't even know if I have a cup to even pour myself into or for solely myself. You know what I'm saying?
And that's what I
Wow.
think is where it gets when we talk about this. You and I are always talking about this weight in different contexts, but it's the
Yes.
same weight of
Yes.
like when you talk about how to pour into yourself. And I think it stems from the commonality between us being like, and this is where I think a lot of people are not in the boat with us of like, there was a time where we both feel confidently, we could say, I know who I am.
Mm.
I don't even use the past tense because we understand we're still that same person, but we look so different now that
Yes.
you see, and I'm like, and it's a mind fuck for lack of a better
Oh,
term,
yeah.
of like to see yourself and be like, you've only grown, but even in the growth, you're like, wow, is that me? How did I get here? Even though I lived it and I know it happened, it's still crazy to identify the shit. And that's why I say when you said something about being lost in the progress of like that's to me is like that's what you're describing. And that's where a lot of that weight comes from. Even in the conversations we've had about me and my life and the way I look at it, it's like that's such a huge part of it. Of every time I think I've identified my identity again,
Mm.
I evolve and I change. And I think that's where that conversation of like being willing to take risks and like the core system of beliefs, like all of it goes hand in hand. And that's why I call it a continuation of like we keep having these drastically different deep dives, but they're really all a continuation of the same
Right.
conversation from different perspectives and lenses.
Yeah, based off of where we're at in our lives. Yeah, and there's been such crazy drastic changes in the 5 years we've been friends. Yeah, it's mm. I don't know where to go from there. So
Shit is
I,
deep. I'm like, can we just take a second to let it all digest? Because I'm like, I'm like, and that's part of why, even though these conversations do cost me
okay,
something, I always leave fulfilled.
yeah. Well, here's a question. Okay,
Mhm.
just so I can hypothetically see. Sometimes it's helpful to look at worst case, right? So, all right. So let's say that I'm someone who been allocated in all these different directions,
Mhm.
I'm starting to lose who I am, what I want, what what thing, what does that look like 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line? How does that show up? How does that manifest? Maybe we could just break it down to as a husband, as a
Mhm.
father, as a friend, maybe as a coworker. Like, what does that look like? Do you have an
Well,
idea of what that looks like?
I think so, but obviously, I would be remiss if I didn't preface with I'm like, it's a hard question, but when you
Yes.
said it, some things jumped in my mind, and I can't
Yeah.
say this is the answer, but it felt like it might be a piece of it. To where it's always easier, you know, to learn. I've said this recently to a couple other people. I feel like, or are in the boat with us of like, it's always easier to learn really deep things about yourself through others like you. And so
Mm.
even with my answer to this question, I'm going to frame it in the sense of like where I've found a lot of appreciation for the type of friendship we've developed of
Sure.
like having these conversations with you has shown me a lot of revelations about my own journey and
Yeah.
the way I can choose to look at it. When you talk about that, it's like there's been several times throughout our friendship where it's like both of us have been in a space where it's like, I don't like this. This is not like
Yeah.
this is like literally those words of like, this is not who I am.
Right.
And it's only in I think this is something too. This would be a great takeaway for the audience of like it is in those moments where you have the greatest opportunity to do a lot of growth quickly if you have the discipline and pre-built um, character to
Yeah.
challenge yourself in those moments of like to overcome pride, overcome emotional
Hmm.
stirrings and like being willing to let somebody challenge you and critique you and to sit and think about whether or not what they're saying has any validity. I think when
Sure. Right. Right. Right.
we get tickled and we start rejecting stuff that people are saying.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a couple of times where I'm like, I want to just. This is funny. It's like, I was gonna start with you, but now I gotta start with me. Of like when we
You're
were
good.
playing Call of Duty, and it's like I had all this shit going on. I wasn't really in my mind. And see, this is part of my toxic coming up of like I didn't think I had that much going on. I'm like I'm out here. I
Gotcha.
don't have a job. I don't know. I'm like you don't really got shit going. You know, you play that game of like other
Of
people's
course.
got way worse stuff going on. Like I'm sitting up here
Sure.
living in LA. Oh, I'm blessed. You know?
Right, right,
And
right.
you're not being real with the emotional truth that you're living in. And so it's like we're getting
Mm,
Call of Duty and everybody's feeling the change that I'm not. I'm the last one to find out of how it's affecting me. That's what it
mm,
looks like. You're the last person to see how it's affecting you because you're feeling it affect you. It is a slow degradation, if you will. It's like you
mm,
start crumbling and you know the skin is peeling off of you. You still have full functionality, but you don't look good. You don't
mm,
energy starts to change. The way you speak starts to change. Like especially when you talk about the kind of people we strive to be, it's like that creates a very unique kind of disposition that people can feel and react to. This is something we've discussed, which is it's a much larger topic, but it's like you start to feel that wither away
mm.
and people around you. That's why the beauty of having people around you who do actually care about you, they're not going to wait until you've offended them to bring it up. They're going to notice because they understand who you are and who you try to be. And
Yes.
so when we have scenarios like that where it's like people are like, "Oh, you know, what's going on?" They're checking in with you, and it's like, unfortunately for me, like I don't usually catch it in that. It's not
No,
until I get into a that I'm
no,
like,
yeah, yeah. A simpler way of putting it is this: you become inauthentic to yourself. You're not being who you who you fuck with, like who you are, like who you think what's cool and what's not. Um, and and I just want to give the three listeners that are still listening um, a little bit of context of Call of Duty, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing that we keep playing, especially as old as we're playing. Um, what happens with Call of Duty is that we're choosing at the core of it. It's it's friends who just want to hang out with each other. That's what we're trying to do. Unfortunately, we chose to do it with one of the most difficult games you could ever imagine playing. And then on top of it, we're all competitive and actually want to win. Another dynamic to this is that, and I would say even with me and Ike's relationship, 90% of what me and Ike have built a relationship on is non face to face communication. So me and Ike, actually, not even just me and Ike, everyone with the 12 people that are in our group, we know each other's tone of voice more than our spouses do, more than our family does. We pick up on things. We could tell if our buddy had one drink, two drinks, 10 drinks. We know based off his voice, like we know. Oh, Ike had a hard day. Oh, Tim had a rough day. Oh, we should check on him. All just based off gameplay and just what we're hearing too. So, as goofy as Call of Duty is, as you could bash on all you want, it's been helpful in a lot of to get to know people in a really weird way. Um,
it's
but
like going to war.
it really is, and it's also going to war after being drained, after or during COVID, during my kid in the NICU, during like our buddy's grandparents dying. Like it's everything that could have happened wrong, and we just get on the game for a release, and we forget that we're coming in with real shit. Um. So, but to put it back, I think that's so. Yeah. What does living not authentically towards yourself, not having no cup to even fulfill yourself with? What does that look like over 2, 5, 10 years? It looks like a person that's not even you, that you don't even like, that you don't even mess with. And I think the longer you go living inauthentically, you'll lose you'll lose who you were, and you'll start building a new habit toward, and this new thing that you don't even mess with, you don't even like. That's just your new normal.
And I think the most
So
dangerous thing about that
yeah,
is that
yeah,
you're if you're not careful, your unawareness of that process happening and stripping you of your what do they call it? Your autonomy, your
Yes.
ability to influence it. You start to feel like things are, and that's the I think one of the things that I've noticed about people who I form these kind of relationships with, it's like accountability becomes huge because even when
Mm,
you take too much accountability, it's almost like a bargain brand autonomy. It allows you to see what you can do and the things you can't control.
mm,
And when you lose your ability to do that, the world, life will decide for you. Every no
mm,
decision is still a decision.
mm.
Those decisions get made regardless. The question is, did you put your 2 cents in the decision? It's just like at work, where it's like you never know when they're going to use your ideas and when they're not. But every time you don't say them, they're not going to get used. And that's
Right.
the soul crushingness of like, oh, it doesn't even matter. I'm not going to say it. But I'm like, as soon as you start adopting that mentality, you start losing your voice so that when you do, you're out of the habit of being able to.
Mm. What it reminds me of from a dad's perspective, and I won't go too deep with my own father, but have you ever had someone in your life who lives away and they have come across this way and then they say something that's so polar opposite of how they come across that you're like, huh? Excuse me? I'll put my dad in here just for a second. It's not that deep. But I remember we had a family situation and my dad said, well, I've never been disappointed in you guys. And both my sister and I just laughed because we've felt this weight of being disappointments for so long that it's because that's how we came across. So, but what it makes me what makes me think about is how sad that is from a dad's perspective. Is he probably thinks highly of us, but because he's living in an inauthentic way, not that doesn't resonate with him. He's being portrayed and comes across as someone who's highly disappointed. So that's another huge reason to live authentically towards yourself so that I think we've all been misunderstood and I think we've all come across harsher or I know me and you both we know that how that feels. I'm like, oh man, that was way more blunt than I wanted to say it. Well, if you wish to be understood, which is a human need, and I think everyone just wishes they felt understood, then live as authentically as you can so that your words and your mind and the way you're being perceived can be as close to how what your heart actually feels. That makes sense.
God, I absolutely love all of that, but specifically the example you chose to use because it's such, I'm like, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. And I'm gonna share this quote, but I'm gonna do it after I talk about why I loved a lot of what you just said in terms of specifically with that example, it shows the fickleness of communication
Mm,
and how polar opposite perspectives can be and without diminishing the reality of the situation.
mm,
That's something that was really hard for me to learn, and I'm really only sadly I'm really just now starting to become aware of it. Of like, you hear me talk about lenses and perspectives all the time, but there's the truth is such a bigger concept than we really are taught in the sense that reality is a culmination of many perspectives. And that's where a lot of these principles of like manifestation and creating your reality, like that's really what they're talking about. Of like, and that's really what
mm,
I was talking about earlier of like exercising your autonomy. It's like
mm.
if a man thinketh, therefore he is. I'm like, that means I am projecting and creating. I am doing my piece to create this reality. It's just like a project that you work on in a team. We have to understand everybody is in this team. And so my piece is a small piece, but it's an important piece. If I don't add my piece, there's a piece missing. And I say all of that to say of like when you talk about even that conversation you guys are having with your dad, it's like one, I know exactly what you mean, which we talked about. And I'll circle back to that, but just like I'm sure, even though you probably couldn't receive it in that moment, the fact that you can call back to it now as a father and as a parent, it's like you can take that sentiment that he shared with you in a completely different context and have it still do work inside of you at this point in time because a conversation was had. And that's the big thing I want to really nail down for the viewers is like so much is lost in things left unsaid. So that's a huge part of being yourself is being willing and courageous enough to be honest. Even if you are in that space where you're a version of yourself you don't like, the only way to get back to the version that you do like is to be honest with where you're at and why you don't like what you do like, and to like communication saves a nation. So that everything and that what you said was huge. And then it's like just for me personally, of like, all right, I'll read this quote before I get into it because this is really what would kind of not created this quote, but this is something I came up with based on a lot of my own experience growing up and trying to figure out my own life. Of like I the first episode, I'm like people didn't watch the other one, but if you did watch them, they know that my father passed away when I was like 5. It was a whole thing. It was dramatic to say the least, but it did a lot for my development. Of like there was just a lot of things I just was not thinking about, would have not thought about if that didn't happen. And to me, that's crazy to say even now because I've always been this kind of thinker of like I was like my whole life I have prioritized development and self-reflection and thinking. But and this is funny because I'm reading it to an actual parent and I'm not a parent at all. But this is my sense on parenting of like a bad parent is a caretaker. A good parent is a hypocrite. A great parent is an example. And I think this, when I thought of this, I was like, damn, that's deep. And it speaks to so much of my reality. I know there's a human truth in there just when it came to me in the sense of like my relationship with my father was always really good in a way that I just was not conscious of. We were very close, but we were the kind of close where I didn't even consider it close. Like I just thought that's what it was supposed to be. Like I'm my mom's only kid. So every time I was with my dad, there's 5 of us. And the youngest 2 were like 10-year difference between us. So it's like, I didn't even realize I had this kind of dad until he passed away because he was this is where I think this is where I got it from. Of like, he just pours into everybody else. And so he ran himself into the ground living like that because of his own struggles and traumas and things he didn't do that I ended up doing by intuitively copying him in the sense of a lot of when I got into my adolescence, that's where our relationship really started, that friction I was talking about. And I thought that was our relationship falling apart when in reality it was inevitable because of how close we were. He was now having to transition into a completely different role. And see, the thing is that always blows my mind is he was always very vocal about in a way that I simply could not understand at that point. He would always tell me, it's like, I'm trying to transition this relationship from a place of father and son into it's like where we can be friends. It's like
Mm.
you're growing up now. It's like you're
Yes.
not my little kid anymore. And I'm like,
No.
so I understood it. I understood the words that were coming out of his mouth, but I didn't understand it in the way that he was trying to articulate it. And so
Yes.
the issue for me at the time was the hypocrisy. I'm like, you
Mm.
say you want to build this relationship and you want to have these conversations, but you're not telling me your truths because of, and see, if I was wiser and more experienced then in the way that I am now, I would understand completely why. He had a lot of shame and guilt. I'm like, these were things that I'm like, I realized growing up, I had a very fickle self-righteousness in the sense of
Mm.
not in the way that, not in the common way that is very outwardly, where it's like, I didn't think I was better than other people. But the problem was, I was holding people to the standard that I held myself
Right.
internally. I
Yes.
wasn't saying and doing things. I was just thinking I was normal. I thought I
Right.
was normal. And I'm like, and I believed in the potential I saw in others. And
There you
I
go.
I didn't understand things like energy and like it's just a lot of shit that like it gets really deep. And so I
Mm.
spent so much of my life trying to figure out why I'm getting these interactions with people because
Mm.
they're feeding off of the energy that I'm pouring into them. And
Mm.
because I'm not aware of that process that I'm engaging in, I'm acting very flippantly about how
Hmm.
I'm affecting their lives. Because
Yes.
in my mind, I don't have you see that humility
Yep.
treats I'm not impacting their lives. Who am I to
Right.
impact their lives?
Right. I'm nothing. Right. Totally.
And it's like that creates a lot of these separations that only communication can fix. And so that was a really long tangent on like with the example that you gave when I talk about the different realities being represented in that. I'm like, that was, I'm like, so much of my life was me thinking I'm communicating and not understanding that I'm not even developed enough to communicate in the way that
Mm.
I'm trying to. I'm trying to
Right.
I'm trying to get deep and I'm not even in a place where I can yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you feel like you were speaking from a place of, here's the thing. I was going to say, do you feel like you're speaking from a place of authenticity to you? And I think if I had to answer that question for you without letting you speak, is yeah, you were. You just weren't developed enough. You weren't wise enough to. You shouldn't be speaking. It's kind of the whole
And
point.
even outside of that, of like, it's not that you shouldn't speak, it's that you have to be given the grace of age. And that's
Yes.
what I think
Yes.
I've learned
Yeah.
recently of like they've been able to dismantle, and I don't want to say that because that sounds like a conspiracy, but everybody knows it's like the system is not built for community. We
Mm.
live by definition of capitalist society.
Right.
Everyone cannot cannot succeed because
No.
that's not capitalism.
Right. Right.
That's not the strong survive. Like that's not what our system is built on. That's not what we're told. And so in that vein, they have been able to dismantle our community and we've really moved away from how we built societies in the past, just historically, in terms of like
Mm.
passing down information through generations.
Right.
That requires strong teaching
Yeah.
and like not teaching regurgitation, but teaching understanding. And
Yeah.
so when I say that, I think I didn't, it's not that anybody did anything wrong. Part of why I love using that example on the back of the example that you use is to the untrained ear, it sounds like I'm highlighting issues. When in reality, I think we're both saying in a really weird way, how we were lucky. We're really, that's the positive spin on our experience of, because of that experience, we were able to start asking questions at an age that others, our peers, have not. We started this journey sooner
Mm.
than we would have otherwise because of our environments. And like, do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? What I'm saying, in the
I'm,
sense of,
I'm almost there.
when we
Almost got you.
talk about getting to this place where we can have this conversation, because we understand this is not a conversation other people would even want to have, let alone would be able to have. It stems from a lot of the commonalities we shared in early development and having
Yeah.
these kind of relationships with people who are really close to you.
Yeah.
When we talk about that hierarchy of needs, it's like, if you've never been hungry or had to hustle, like if you've never been motivated to hustle, not just
Hmm.
externally from a place of
Hmm.
I got to eat, I don't know how I'm gonna survive, but internally of I don't want to repeat this cycle, and
There you go.
I refuse to by any means.
Yeah.
Like, having those two smashed together really
Mm.
opens up your mind in a way that it puts that cart before the horse in a
Yes.
certain regard. And so it's
Yes.
like, it's not that you're doing things wrong. You're just so
No.
far ahead that you're putting yourself behind in certain regards.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not a fault of anything. It's just the roll of the dice. It's what you were dealt, and now we're here just dealing with the struggle. So yeah, what to wrap to. I feel like we have some gold here. What I'm curious is how, and I think this has gone long. What I'm curious is how could we wrap this with some kind of takeaway, some kind of nugget that would be helpful. That Because I
I
felt like
think
we had some aha moments that I felt like
definitely.
were actually helpful.
I think we can return it to the original point
Not to
of where.
control your thing.
No, I'm like, I keep glancing up at the clock myself too, because I'm like, damn, it's already been, we going on 2 hours now.
Yeah.
We started, if you were coming off the end of that, it sounds like we went somewhere way different than where we started. But in reality, I think that's the best way for me, is always closing with a clear line drawn to how we got here. And the real
Mm.
conversation we're having of, when we talk about, you said something earlier, I'm like, that's the title of like, can I find joy in my career is the question. But in order to find joy in your career, the sub ask, the unspoken question is, do I know how to find joy? Do I know how to seek it?
Mm.
Do I even know how to
Wow.
pursue it?
Right. Right. And I think if I was to be honest with myself, not to take it take it back, but like I don't. If I was asked myself, can I find joy within work? You'd first have to identify what is joy and how does joy manifest itself within your work. And if I'm being honest with myself, I don't feel like I've done that work. I don't think I've identified what joy looks like within my career. And because I have been maybe too caught up in surviving, or too caught up in my kids, or too caught up in just getting to the next thing, or just not having my eye focused on that simple question. Not a simple question, but you get my point. Maybe what I've done poorly this time is I've labeled this, and I've said it 1,000 times on this episode. I've labeled it as my dream job, which is already setting myself up for failure. I really need to be honest with myself and ask myself, what would bring you joy, dude? Like what would you love? What would you be excited to do? And again, when you just weren't brought up in an environment where that question isn't, no one's asking themselves, get to work, shut up. Yeah. Does that make sense? So
I'm like, that's the perfect close.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So I guess maybe that's one. So, and then the other thing I was going to say is, so the question is, can I find joy? Okay, the answer to that is, well, define joy. Okay. Then the question is, and this is more related to fathers out there and people with spouses and whatever commitments. When, when now that you've dived, when can you find joy? When is it appropriate? When is it okay? And that's a harder question. And that's going to be for each individual person to, to really figure out when it's okay. Probably doesn't make sense to do that when you have newborns that aren't sleeping through the night. That, there's some obvious answers to this question. It makes a little bit more sense when your kids are in high school, but I feel like that's when you really need to be there. But at least they're sleeping. So it's,
But I think what I love about the way you're laying it out is that the big takeaway is that it has to be in that order. I think right now people are doing it in the reverse order. They're like, when do I do things for me? Instead of asking, what do I do for myself? What does joy look like for me? Because that, you see, I'm like, that's, if we struck gold here, I think it's that revelation of like changing the order of those asks allows you to be more efficient and move it outside of your career. I think because a person's career takes so much of that allocation is such a big percentage of his career because it's solving so many other issues. To fix the issues there. But when you ask yourself, what brings me joy? It clears up a lot of things outside of the career that then help guide you to that larger.
And if I could offer any advice to anyone listening, let's not undermine how difficult a question that is. Well, just to answer that question, what brings me joy within my career, within my job, or how can joy manifest itself? And it's very difficult. It's not easy. And a place to start for people that struggle with that question is try to identify your values. And if you can first start with what you value, and this has helped with, I've learned this through career coaching and therapy and all this crap I've been through.
Save you some money.
Save you some money. This little tip is just to go just start writing down values. And I remember when my therapist asked me, "What do you value?" I was like, "I don't even know what a value is. I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't even know what. I'm just trying to pay the bills. Like, what are you talking about?" So, just a tip for people: if you're trying to find joy, start with what you value. Try to figure out what things make you tick. If it's work-life balance, if it's a non-toxic environment, if it's having your stuff on billboards, whatever you define as, whatever ticks your boat or ticks your clock or floats your boat, or eats your chip or whatever, floats your boat. So just a little helpful tip.
Well, I feel like that's the perfect place to stop. I feel like we definitely got deep.
And thanks for having me, dude. Appreciate you.
Thanks for coming along. Hopefully the viewers feel as good as we do after the end of that.